And just a reminder as we get started, hello everyone. Just to make sure that you mute your phones and use the *6 for muting. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Living Off Your Paycheck. My name is Judy Lawrence, and I'm a financial counselor with MoneyTracker.com, and I'm the author of the Budget Kit 6th edition workbook. Now, I've been in this personal finance business for over 20 years as a writer, a coach, and a trainer, and I've sat at many of those kitchen tables with couples and individuals who had all kinds of different household and personal situations. So I'm here on behalf of Anthem, your EAP wellness provider, and as you probably know, you have some really excellent benefits, so do take advantage of them. And I'll cover this a little bit more at the end to just review your benefits and where you can get some additional assistance. And if some of you were on the webinar last week, the financial fitness webinar, then some of the topics may be a little similar and you may have a few repeats, but if you missed any point or you needed to hear it again, then these topics will just be a great review. And what we're going to cover today will be the psychology of money, goal setting, credit and debt, need versus gravy, tips for saving and budgeting. And this seminar is meant to talk about money and your relationship with money in a way that makes you more conscious about your money on a daily basis. And as you probably know or have experienced, boy, money is the number one stressor today. It's the most uncomfortable topic to discuss. I mean, there are all these major hot buttons and triggers for everybody, especially couples. I've worked with couples for decades as a coach, and I've also worked in the divorce courts and continue to work with divorce cases. So I definitely see the impact there. How much we make, how much we save or spend, these are topics that are just seldom discussed, and they're just very private. Whether it's friends, family, and spouses, it seems to be a very sensitive topic. Also, since the recession of 2010, we've all been doing some belt-tightening and behavioral adjustments, and it seems that the name of the game now is not just living within your means, but consider living below your means and start considering ways to expand your emergency savings and be more prepared for those unknown events in terms of jobs and industry changes that are happening. And we'll be talking more about that. As we talk about psychology of money, ask yourself these questions. And then as you're asking yourself these tough questions, one way to start it off is, are you a spender? Are you a saver? Is this a pattern that you picked up from your childhood? And what else did you pick up? Or what else did you observe around you when you were young? What does money mean to you? Does it mean status, power, security, confidence? And has it changed over the years? Has it changed after marriage? Has it changed after having a family? And what did money mean to you when you were growing up? Has it changed since your childhood? And then think about your childhood experience and memories that impacted your relationship with money. Now, as an adult, how is that affecting you? Yes, and the question is, am I recording this? Yes, I am recording this. So you will have a copy of this. So if you have comments or questions about childhood, about your memories, about what you learned about money, go ahead and just send me a comment. I realize these are all pretty personal, so sometimes I don't get a response in this area. And then keep those questions in the back of your mind as you look at these. The other thing is, what do you need to do in order to change your behavior? How has this last recession affected or changed your behavior? I've seen so many changes with people in terms of credit card use, their attitude about money, where they're cutting back. So changes are happening, and along with that is the latte factor. You may have heard of the latte factor with David Bach's book, Automatic Millionaire. And what he's referring to is like the frivolous spending items. This could be the latte, could be your downloads, could be other drinks, could be bagels. And what he does is he shows two columns. He'll show the first column with the different things you spend money on, your coffee, your Coke, your newspaper, your muffin, your chips throughout the day. And what he'll do, then he'll say, okay, that's $10 a day. Then he shows how much that $10 a day would total up to every week, every month, every year, which, by the way, after 10 years would be over $36,000. But after 42 years, which is kind of the time frame of working, $10 a day would be over $153,000. So it does have a major impact. Then what he does is a second column where he shows, okay, how about if you kept that latte to $3, but you skip the $7, you skip the chips, the muffins, the paper, and save that $7. Save it. How much would you save in a week, in a month, in a year? And again, by the way, that would be over $2,500 savings in a year. Or what if you invested it at 10%? So then he's saying after 42 years, you'd have $1.3 million. So these are huge amounts. You could be saving $154,000 a year, or spending, I should say, $154,000 a year, or saving $1.3 million. But the point is, these little things add up, and we don't see it that way when it's on a daily basis. So think about your own possible latte factor. What are the small little daily spending that could add up to a lot? You love the latte factor, yes. It's a huge one. And Mary, do you have any ideas on what your latte factor is? Because this does affect a lot of people.
Do think about that.
Right. Do, because the other part of that is what I call the it's only syndrome. How often do we hear ourselves saying, oh, it's only. The bottle of water at the kids' car wash is only $1. That beautiful, perfect top you saw in the favorite online store is only $15, or that car for sale is only $15,000. But what happens when we use that "it's only" statement? It's kind of a short-circuiting in the brain around the topic of money, and we start dismissive about the cost, and we start to justify it by saying it's only. So the main thing is pay attention to that. And this goes along with how motivated are you to change your money belief system. How willing are you to change your beliefs, your past beliefs, your habits, your behaviors, your it's only syndrome? It's not easy to change behaviors, but it's definitely doable. Change is definitely doable as long as you're motivated. And part of the motivation is having those small steps. We've all heard about taking the baby steps, and this is really another way of saying stay mindful, conscious around your daily decision with your money, your behaviors, your choices. Each decision can take you in either direction. It's going to be either closer to being wealthy or further away from that. But you get to decide. And let's look at how we can direct these decisions. Okay. All right, changing your behaviors. We have a list of ways to change your behavior, but I find that personally, I think motivation should really be at the top. There generally has to be some powerful, compelling reason to change, some reason to be motivated to change your behavior, or why bother? Motivation is a discussion about how badly do you want to change your behavior, how badly do you want to get out of debt, be stress-free, have a sense of financial peace of mind. And let's now go back to that learned optimism. In fact, you might have heard the Learned Optimism book by Martin Seligman from the University of Pennsylvania. And basically, he wrote this book saying it's possible to learn to change your attitude and shift from cynicism to optimism. So the optimism is possible. If you know someone who's cynical, that doesn't mean they can't change. I have a question here about difficulty hearing. Actually, it's not hearing through the computer. Do call in, and I left a message earlier for the group where you can get it on the phone. So make sure you call the number and use the code number. Okay. And let's see. I'm on a speakerphone. Yes, I am. So I apologize if it's a little muffled. Going on then to the 21 days. and do let me know how it's sounding for you. You've probably heard about the 21 days to change a behavior, and we've probably heard it as the Ben Franklin approach. And recently, I heard that changing a behavior is also the practice of doing repetition for 300 times to learn a new behavior, kind of tied into the whole neural pathway process. Thank you. I'm glad this is better. And then another thing for changing behavior is necessity. You can, with necessity, how can this be a motivator? And if you have any examples of necessity, I'm sure a lot of people will say necessity has changed them. Sometimes an example would be poor health. Can be a necessity for causing some behavioral change, whether it's getting more exercise, finding a way to stop smoking, or starting a program for losing weight. But necessity can change our behaviors. A reality check is another way to change behavior. I mean, we all love to live in a world where we can deny our reality around us, but that, as you know, that only lasts just so long. For example, it's easy to believe those commercials and decide to buy what you want using credit cards and not think about those consequences of the balance, the credit limit, the ability to pay in terms of your paycheck. And in the end, reality does kind of catch up, and it pays to do an internal reality check when you're making a decision. And this, too, can strengthen ways for changing your behavior. Also, part of that reality check is just being in touch with your money, knowing how much money do you bring in with your paycheck, how much is being saved, how much debt do you have, how much is actually needed on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And for many, a great motivator for changing behaviors is the last thing on the list here, having a role model. There are lots of stories of people who made it financially under the most challenging conditions who stand out as real role models. And if you have a role model that you want to share, someone in your life who managed money well, lived off their paycheck, lived within their means, and that they were a model for you, please go ahead and share. I happen to be on the board of directors for Habitat for Humanity, and I'm also on the Family Selection Committee. And boy, some of those stories I hear and see with these families are amazing. I remember one single mom who had 3 children, a full-time basic job, but she never got behind on her bills, and she always made sure if she had to clean homes or clean yards or knit hats or make burritos to save money for her children, she would do that. Do you have a question or comment? Okay. Also, at one of my last workshops, I had a lady who came from a home where she had 8 brothers and sisters, and her single mom managed to keep them housed and fed and turn into responsible, productive adults. So she said her mom was her role model. And then, okay, Angela, your parents grew up during the Depression. Yes. You would squeeze a penny further than anyone I know. I mean, those are great role models to always have in our life. The other thing to be aware of and remember is, just as you're talking about your parents here, you are the role model. If you have children, you are the role models right now for your children in terms of how you're managing your money, how you're managing that paycheck. So think of it in terms of, would you be proud of your children when they're adults if they're managing their money the way you're currently managing it, because you're their role model. And remember, they're picking up everything you say and do and think and don't say when it comes to money, because they're being affected by all of it. And then finally, with changing behavior, we've got the becoming a learner. And that term now, with the pace of change and the global direction that we're going through, seems to be that we're all needing to be lifelong learners. Money may seem complicated and living within your means may seem daunting, but it really doesn't have to be. Embrace the learning. I mean, you are all in an education setting, and you know that knowledge is power. And part of that knowledge is understanding all the different facets of money. And one of the next things we're going to talk about with understanding money is understanding your net worth. people tend to look at how much money they earn and then equate that with their net worth. Well, that's part of the picture, but it's not nearly the full picture. And plenty of people make a nice living, and they still manage to have more debt than they have income. Or what I often hear people complaining about is that they make great money, but they seem to have very little to show for their money. And remember, it's not how much you make, it's what you keep that counts. And according to a survey that was done back in 2011, it was done on behalf of some different financial institutions, they found that a full 1/3 of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. And if they lost their job, they would not be able to make their next rent or the next mortgage payment. And that's a pretty scary statistic. And actually, that hasn't changed that dramatically. So that is something to think about. And it's all the more reason to not only know how to comfortably live off your paycheck, but to be able to save money and increase your net worth every year. And talking about net worth, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, but just as a reminder, this is a perfect time of the year to be doing this. I always encourage people at the beginning of the year or tax time when we're much more fiscally focused. This is the time to go back and look at your net worth. Figure out, what are you really worth? What's your financial worth? And again, not just focusing on how much is coming in through your paycheck. If you haven't calculated your net worth recently, just remember, basically what you're going to do is you're listing all your assets. Those are the things that you own, like your home or other real estate, automobiles, savings account, investments, antiques, art. Those are your assets. And then listing all of your liabilities or your debts. Those are the things that you owe. Balance on your mortgage, on your car payments, your student loans, other loans, credit cards, personal loans. And then basically you just subtract what you owe from what you own to determine where you stand financially. And it's good to do this once a year to just know where do you stand and making sure that you have a plan to move forward so that each year that worth gets greater and greater. And there's nothing like seeing all of your assets and all of your debt in black and white to motivate you to make some changes. Any questions or comments on net worth? One way to reach that goal is of having a net worth, improving it is, and everything is to have goals, setting goals. And I'm sure you've all been to many of the goal-setting workshops and webinars. And anyone remember what the word is to remember how to set those effective goals? You can in your chat. And just to move forward, just a reminder, if you remember this from before, the word is SMART. There you go. You got it, Danielle. Yes, SMART. Specific. The goals want to be specific. They want to be measurable so that you have an ending date to them. They're attainable so that you can reach them. They're realistic, and we all know what kind of goals people have that aren't realistic, but make sure they're realistic and timely so that you do know that it's something you can do in a certain time and when you're going to get them done. And there's variations of that, but that's how some of the SMART has been identified. But the other key is being sure to actually write down those goals and then be sure to review them regularly. Sometimes people write them down and tuck them away and never look at them again. So it's one way to set goals. And financial goals can be savings, getting a home, buying a car, starting for college, retirement. Anybody have used the system of SMART for setting goals or any other system? But think about it, whatever it is, whether you use that or anything else, having some intention, some way that you do make some change. You can see some of these common goals listed here, but some of the other ones are some people want to go back to graduate school, or some people want to start a new profession, or start a business. So there's lots of different goals. And now that you have a plan for reaching the goals, then the next step is creating some kind of a spending plan when we're talking about the financial. Part of creating a spending plan is starting out by outlining your fixed expenses each month. And this is where you include the money for your savings. And this is where we talk about pay yourself first. And pay yourself first is building that emergency fund. And let's see what else here. I want to go back to the paying yourself first, just to cover that a little bit more. Sometimes people decide, well, I want to pay off my mortgage. That's an important expense, and it definitely is. And others say, well, I get the car loan paid, the student loan paid. These are all important. But when you're creating that plan, you want to have a way that you get those fixed expenses covered, but at the same time, your fixed expense is paying yourself first and making sure that you have a savings plan for that emergency fund. You want to have an emergency fund and definitely contribute to your retirement fund. If you have a retirement fund with your jobs, which I'm sure you all do, max it out. Get a match. That's one of the best ways that you can be paying yourself first. I know what a lot of people tend to do is it's so tempting just to look at your bills, try to figure out all the fixed bills, all the other spending, and then if there's any money left over, okay, I'll put that into savings, right? And then that's the way to do it. That's what people do, and then we know the Dr. Phil question, well, how is that working for you? For many, it doesn't work well because there's always something that comes up. So paying yourself is making sure you take care of yourself first. That emergency fund is an account that you keep deliberately for those surprise expenses. These are those totally unexpected expenses, like you drive over a nail and suddenly you need new tires, or your plumbing backs up, you need a plumber, or suddenly you have to buy a new hot water heater. Those are emergencies. I know sometimes people suddenly realize their tires are getting low and it's like, oh gosh, I'm going to need tires. That's an emergency. Actually, that's not an emergency because that would be part of your budgeting, your planning. If you really thought it through, you would know, okay, by next fall, at the rate I'm driving and how many miles I get, I will probably be needing new tires. And many people like to keep this emergency account somewhere where it's hard to access. For some, that means maybe having an account across town that they can't transfer from their other account, and therefore they don't touch it and they leave it alone. It also helps to contribute to that emergency fund automatically, just automatic deposits from your checking. And again, you're not really seeing the money, you move it right away, and you build up the fund. And the key is building up the fund so it's slowly adding up, even if you're using small amounts. The important part is small amounts do add up, but more importantly, psychologically, you're gaining confidence in your ability to save money. I've heard so many people say, I'm just a terrible saver, I can't save money. Part of that is not having a plan because they put a big chunk in and they weren't really thinking it through, and then they end up pulling most of that money out. And psychologically, you keep that up, and pretty soon you don't see yourself as a very good saver. And again, with the retirement fund, take advantage of your retirement fund. And let's see, moving on then to some goals for retirement. That's another thing to be looking at with our money. Let's look at the goals for retirement and look at those questions. What percentage of your average annual gross salary do you need to retire? What do you want your retirement to look like? What lifestyle compromises are you willing to make? It's not always easy to answer these questions, and sometimes when they're younger, who cares? But the sooner you start, the sooner it will really make a difference. This is not a retirement seminar, so we're not really going to get into a lot of this, but do know that with your EAP benefits, you do have a lot of resources and information and calculators and websites that you have access to. And supposedly, The average age of retirement these days is 72, according to the books and various experts. But a lot of experts are now saying, in some cases, retirement's almost non-existent, especially with the events of this past decade. And as shocking as it may seem, most experts say that the percent of your salary needed when you retire is at least 85% of your gross average annual salary. Some say 100%, some say 150%. And it all just depends on your health, your conditions, your health conditions, where you live, your lifestyle choices, what you're going to be doing. And the key is, if you're going to be living a long time, that does have an impact on that retirement. But regardless of whatever percentage is given, it's not the real issue. Basically, the majority of people do not have enough saved for retirement right now, considering, as I said, how long they're living. And the bottom line from the various studies is, don't worry as much about how the money is invested in terms of where and the return on the money, but be aware and focus on what you can control. You can control things like saving more money, working longer years is what some people do, changing your spending habits. That's what you have control over. And those are things to really pay attention to and do whatever you can to keep those at a maximum. And when you factor in the uncertainty about Medicare and Social Security and health issues, retirement is going to be expensive. So the goal is to take charge of your money now, save on a regular basis from here on in, no matter what your age is, and start thinking about retirement and how you want it to look. Then consider the lifestyle compromises you're willing to make during retirement, but even more importantly, how to help your retirement be closer to what you really want. What are you dreaming of? How can you make that happen? The other thing that I've noticed comes up, and I've seen this with many clients, is the big question is, do you fund your children's future by paying for their college education or paying off their loans, which I know is so tempting for most parents. They can't stand to have their children go through such debt. But their children are young, and their children have the means to make and manage their own finances. The other part of that is, or do you want to fund their future, or do you want to fund your own future so your children are not having to ultimately deplete their savings to take care of you and their growing children? So these are, considerations that are not easy to think about. Another thing to think about when planning for your retirement is, how do you manage your credit history so that by the time you're in retirement, you're not having money issues on that end. And you may have, heard a lot about credit, but let's talk about credit and the credit score. In the past, the credit score was not as central in your financial life as it is today. Now it's a huge event. You can see the range of scores that are there and how that has such an impact. The credit score now impacts your insurance, your renting or owning a home, getting a job, buying a home. It has an effect everywhere. In fact, last year I was looking to rent a home, and each time I'd go somewhere, I'd have to pay another $35, $45 for a credit report, even though I was not entitled to get that report. And it didn't necessarily mean that even though I had a good score, that I actually got to rent that place. So that's the frustrating part of what's going on now with credit reports. And remember, you've got the 3 credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, and each one is going to give you a different FICO score. At the same time, if you are buying a car or you're buying or getting a home loan, you're going to notice that you have different scores there because they use different reporting agencies. If you're wanting to know what's on your credit report, remember, you're entitled to 1 free credit report each year, and you can get one from each agency. Also, if you ever turn down for credit, whatever you're applying for and they turn you down, they'll also give you a letter what the credit report says, what credit bureau it was. You're entitled to a free credit report then from that bureau. Also, on the next slide, we're going to see that you can always go to annualcreditreport.com, and that's where you can get more information, where to download your credit report. So let's look at those 5 parts of a credit score. A lot of times people don't realize what actually makes up the score. There's types of credit. Actually, this is about 10% of your score. This is that mix of credit. It's good to have a mix. I mean, sometimes people only have credit cards. Well, that's not enough. Credit cards will show compounding interest, and it shows revolving, but they also want to see installment loans. These are loans with a fixed interest rate, like your car loan or some other loan that you have that you're paying the same amount every month. But the worst kind of credit in that credit mix is if you happen to have a finance company. Those are the ones that are pretty challenging. The next area is a debt ratio, the debt-to-income ratio. Basically, how much can you borrow versus how much can you make? And when they're looking at, the impact on your score, they're looking at what's called the outstanding debt. And this can be about 30% of an impact on your credit report score. This is like what are the totals of all of your debt, especially your credit card debt. So if you have, say, a limit of $5,000 on your credit card, the limit of how much you can spend, they're looking at how much of that debt are you using. Ideally, just as a simple calculation, I suggest that you just stay at 50% of that limit. So don't go higher than $2,500 on your card. A lot of people try to max out one card, thinking that's a wise way to do it. But it doesn't work that way, because your percentage is going to be worse in that situation when you have it so close to your limit. You're better off kind of spreading out all your debt across the different cards rather than maxing any particular card out. But just know that having high debt on cards is a 30% impact. The other thing is your payment history and length of credit history. That's another 30% effect on your score. This is where they're looking at, are you paying your bills on time? Are they late? Are they below the minimum requirement? Those kinds of things are a huge hit on your credit score, and they're also the simplest way to improve your score. If you've had problems with credit in the past, one of the simplest things to do is pay your debt on time, make sure you're paying at least the minimum, and then make sure that you're not delinquent, because the more delinquent accounts you have, again, the worse it affects your score. So keep everything current. Also, opening and closing credit cards can hurt your score, so be very mindful of what's going on in that arena. The length of your credit history is valuable. So when you're opening and closing, if you have an account that you've had for a long time and somehow they haven't closed it, even though you don't use it now, that's great. Just leave it alone, because it's showing a long history. Sometimes they do close it for inactivity, but if you're trying to show history and you want to show ongoing activity, not opening and closing. And then finally, the hard inquiries. This is about 10% of your score, and these all inquiries show up on your credit report, whether it's from credit promotions, employers, credit card applications, bank reviews. Just be aware of how all of this is affecting your score. Like I said, it's only about 10%, but it's still out there. It's not huge, but it does make a difference. The important thing is if you've applied to purchase a car or you're in the process of buying a home, be sure to stop all the other activity applying for anything and to leave that alone until the loan has actually closed. And if you know you're going to be buying a car or starting the process of buying a home, make sure for months ahead of time that you're not making any new applications anywhere. And before moving on, remember, with all this financial information, just be sure to start your children as well, making them aware of money and credit and debt. If they're teenagers and if they happen to have cards, Help them understand what good credit is, the importance of those balances, and the importance of not spending more than they make. Or if your children are in college, the same thing. And speaking of the credit cards, remember they're just a tool. Credit cards, or living on plastic as we're now seeing it, they're pretty much a part of our everyday life. But again, the game of the credit cards has changed a lot over the years, especially since the Credit Card Act of 2009. What's happening is they have higher interest rates now. The qualifying is more difficult for cards, and you've probably noticed this if you've applied for cards. Also, pay attention to your statements. Watch your interest rates. Watch the minimum payments. I've seen situations where they're suddenly jacked up. If you've had problems in other areas, all of your other cards start to kind of reflect that. And just notice what the monthly charges are, and not to ignore those statements. Do be aware of your credit card and that information that's there. Paying attention is a key with all the financial information. There's actually many benefits of using cards. I mean, some people say, get rid of your cards altogether, and cards can be valuable. They help you establish a credit history, and unfortunately, in today's age, we do need credit history. I've seen people who try to live strictly on cash, and really, it's an admirable thing, and I think it's really valuable, but there are times when they're on cash and they start having problems if they ever want to do something that requires credit history. But the value is you can reserve rooms, rent cars, you have convenience. The thing I love is the whole idea of this OPM, other people's money. Why not use your card? Of course, take advantage of all the benefits, but make sure you're managing those cards as a responsible adult and paying them off in full. That's the key with credit cards, and we all know this. And, of course, we also know that it's easier said than done, and soon people are using their credit cards when they don't have the money or they're living beyond their paychecks, and they're ending up with credit card balances. And the problem with that is what people don't realize many times is that having balances basically says that they're unconsciously supplementing their income with credit cards. We don't see it that way, but that's really what it is. It's as if you have additional money. And on the same level, they're deluding themselves into thinking that they have more money than they really have, and they're overspending. And there have been studies that have shown when you use credit cards, people tend to spend 30% more using credit cards versus using cash or their debit cards. And there's more information, as you can see, on the website up there, and there's lots of information on the web for all this information. But since debt is so woven into our lifestyle, let's talk about how to pay off debt. You may have seen this worksheet before, and I'm going to go over it and try not to get overwhelmed with it here. It's an example of how a small change in your behavior can lead to a really powerful change in your financial outcomes. And you may have heard of these payoff systems as the snowball effect, where you pay off debts with the lowest balance, or there's the avalanche effect, where you attack the higher interest first. But the main thing is think about your own personal style. What works for you? What's important? Some people just need the satisfaction of getting something out of the way, which I'm going to go over on this chart. Others just want to tackle the big high interest rate first. So let me go over this chart, and then I'm going to give you some information where you can really get a chart like this that's free on a website. So let's look at, let's say, the Smiths here. They had 3 loans. The first loan was for $2,000 at 12% interest. Second one was $6,000 at 18% interest, and the third loan was the big one. That was $10,000, and that was at 24% interest. So we know that that's a challenging one. And then every one of them has a term of 96 months. 96 months is 8 years to be paying off these loans. The minimum payment for each of these is in the middle there. That first loan is going to be $32.51, and you can see the second one, $118 and $255. So the total of all those minimum payments is $405.99, or let's say $406. So the key here with this virtuous circle versus a vicious circle is to add $100. And where do you get $100? Well, that's where you go back and you look at your budget, you look at your spending, you look at your latte factor, and decide where could I save $100 every month, and do that as a habit and see the powerful impact of what that will do. So let's say you're going to add $100 to your minimum payments each month. So now every month, making these Smiths here are going to make a payment of $505.99. So to see how that works, let's look at loan 1 at the very bottom. Normally their original payment was $32.51, but now they're going to add $100, so the new payment's $132.51. So now instead of taking 8 years to pay off that loan, it's only going to take you less than a year and a half to pay that loan off. That's huge. What they're not showing here is the amount of money that you're going to save in interest rates and that whole thing. Yes, if you have a question. Otherwise, if you mute your phone, the *6. Thank you. Let's move on then and see how this works. If you have done this before, you know how this works, and if not, it's a great plan. So after those 17 months, that first debt is out of the way, and you can just celebrate that you paid it off in such a short time. Now take the whole amount, the $32.51 minimum, that extra $100 you've been paying, and now you're going to apply it to the second loan. And by the way, you've been paying second and third loan all along, just making minimum payments with this plan. So now we're going to go to loan 2, because we no longer have a loan 1. Add that extra $132 to the normal minimum, and suddenly your new payment is $250.85. But there, too, instead of going for 8 years, 96 months, now you're going down to a payoff of less than 4 years. So you're saving half of the time, and again, there's going to be a ton of money that you save by not having to pay that interest for 4 more years. And then you can see you just take the same pattern and do this for the third loan. And I want to just, hold on here. I'm going to give you some information in the chat box here. Okay. Basically, there's a website called vertex.com, and I just sent that off. Oh, wait, here we go. And Vertex, VERTEX 42.com. You'll get the same process, and you can plug in all your numbers. You can decide, do you want to go higher or lower? How do you want to set it up? Do you want to pay off the smaller amount first, or do you want to just tackle the big one first? It will help you do that. So it's a great resource. So let me move on to the next topic, which is meat versus gravy. Basically, when we're talking about living off our paycheck, managing our money, it's the idea of our needs versus our wants. When you're making purchases, ask yourself, is this a need or is this a want? And there are all kinds of examples of our basic needs. Think in terms of housing, food, transportation, health, and then all the subcategories. There's lots of fixed needs in there. They're the meat. But what are the example of the gravy? Because under each of those categories, there's a certain amount of the wants. We may need some jeans, or some, your children may need their jeans. And the gravy or the meat approach would be you go to Costco and you buy the basic jeans, but the gravy part would be you're buying your designer jeans somewhere. But from my perspective, the overarching theme here is really about raising our consciousness, our mindfulness, our overall awareness about how are we spending money. And this is where you get to refine your ability to differentiate and ask yourself every time you make a purchase, is this a need? Is this a want? Is this really serving me? Is this serving my goals? When you listed goals, is this serving your retirement goals, your goals in general, your savings for emergencies? And, of course, one way to be determining and working out your meat versus your gravy, your needs and wants, is to set up your budgeting. And this particular sheet shows you percentages. It's one approach if you happen to like guidelines and percentages. And what they're saying here, 70% should go towards the fixed expenses in your lifestyle, like your rent, your car payment, your auto insurance, the daycare, the utilities, things like that are fixed. And then they suggest the 10% for retirement and then the cash areas, things like that. But basically, when it comes to percents, I really find that ultimately it's much more effective to have a true handle and understanding of your own financial circumstances. Create your own budget, your own spending plan, and figure out your own percentages. I mean, we can look at what they are nationally, what everybody suggests, but I really suggest find out what's reasonable for you in your household that makes sense and is making sure that you're putting money in retirement, putting money in emergency funds, taking care of your goals, regardless of how those percents work out for you. And then as you think about your budgeting, think about, as it says here, win in the margins. From pennies we get broke, and from pennies we get rich. I actually hadn't heard that quote before, but basically we're just talking about realizing that small changes can make a big difference. Spending those pennies without planning or without thinking can lead to being broke. Or if you have some spending plan, you have some budget, and you're watching those pennies, then it can help you become rich. And we've all heard the stories of the millionaire next door, how they do watch their coupons, and they do go on, watch the sales, and they do watch the bargains and get the specials at the restaurants. So it does make a difference watching those pennies. And much depends on your own awareness, your consciousness, your personal control and action versus depending on some big windfall. I mean, a lot of people like to think, oh, maybe I'm just going to win that lottery or whatever it is, but it doesn't always work that way. Anybody have any questions or comments about budgeting that's worked for you or budgeting that hasn't worked for you or saving money? We're going to actually go next to tips for saving money, but any comments or questions so far? I know we have a small group, so you're welcome to chime in here. And if you think of something, go ahead and add it, but I'll just go ahead and then move on to tips for saving money. And I'm sure you all have your own tips, so please feel free to just jot them down in the chat here. We've got the standard, turn the lights off, not going out to eat, not ordering food in. Actually, I want to stop here at the not going out to eat. This seems to be the trigger for a lot of people if they're wanting to change their behaviors and talk about budgets or spending plans. For some people, you start saying, we're not going to go out to eat, and boy, everything just now turned into deprivation and turned into drudgery. And I'm encouraging everyone to look at managing your money, creating a spending plan, having a budget as liberating, because people who have done this will tell you it is liberating. And as we look at the not going out to eat, it doesn't have to be that severe of not out to eat. It could be more like, okay, you still get to go out to eat, but what choices? You have control over choices. A lot of people have chosen to stop the drinks. They don't have drinks, they drink their water. They save in drinks, they save in appetizers, they save in dessert, but they still get to go out to eat. So think of different ways to be creative, be resourceful, get your needs met. If you could *6 your phone, I'm hearing some background noise here, so just *6. And just think of where can you be resourceful and creative in saving money. Not ordering food in. We're back to the food. Actually, an interesting story is one woman did decide that she was not going to go out to eat for lunch every day, and she started bringing her lunch to work. And she was actually able to fund her IRA just by that one behavioral change. And she was actually excited by it. So it wasn't about giving something up. She actually gained something from it. Shopping various grocery stores. This is kind of the coupon approach to things. Buying clothes that don't require dry cleaning. That's always an interesting one. I've noticed more and more people are shopping that way so they can just save the cost of dry cleaning. And then, of course, gift-giving habits. There's lots of different ways to do gifts that don't have to involve money. And taking advantage of the library, free movies, all the discounts that are available. Another thing that's not on here is not becoming complacent with your ongoing expenses. You know, whether it's your insurances, your cable TV, your phone service. A number of these expenses that seem and are often fixed expenses do have flexibility. If you call in and find out what's the new promotion, what's something new that's going on. Maybe you don't need a full coverage anymore. Maybe you can raise your deductible. Maybe there's something different going on with your cable. Whatever it is, the key is to not become complacent and to check in every 6 months or every year and find out, do you have anything else where I can save some money? Because they're not going to let you know, that's for sure. It's up to you to take action and find out how can you save some money in whatever your supposed fixed expenses are. Anybody have some tips or ideas for how you save money? And along the idea of this saving money, remember the children. I always think it's great to keep the children involved when it comes to money. You'd be amazed at how resourceful and creative they can be once they're kind of brought in the process. If you're saving for a trip or you're saving for something for the home, they love to participate. And I've always been impressed with the different ways that children have come up with wonderful ideas. Any questions, comments? All right. But again, feel free to add them anytime you like on the chat. Then let's just look at all the information that we covered, from retirement plans to emergency savings to setting up a budget to looking at your net worth, paying yourself first, all these different topics related to living on your paycheck, living within your means, and doing it in a way that you feel like you're thriving. After you think about all of those different things, what would be some action items that you would do in the next 24 hours? Again, this is kind of like the goals. It's writing it down. What steps do you need to take? What's one thing that you want to do to achieve your goals? So it's a matter of what steps and what information do you need to move forward with that. And that's your action item. Just like anything else, it's a matter of thinking of a way to make something happen, especially with your finances. And then finally, always realize there's tons of resources out there right now. The books, I've talked about a few of these books and some of the websites. And the question was earlier, was this going to be recorded? And yes, this is recorded. And you can come back and look at some of these resources that are here. And then finally, the biggest resource for you is your own EAP. Remember, you can have counseling services from them, counseling sessions. You've got financial consultation. You've got free credit monitoring. You have ID theft recovery. All of those things related to money are so critical. So definitely find out what you're entitled to, take advantage of what you're entitled to, and make the best of this. And then I just want to make sure that I haven't missed something, or if anybody has any more questions or comments for today. I really thank you all for attending. I know we had a nice small group, but it's always fun to have a group that participates, and I can see that we had some ideas here. And I wish you all a really prosperous 2015. with greater financial peace of mind and just a really solid financial future. So again, we do have a few minutes if anyone has any questions or comments before I close out this recording. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of the year. Any quick comments before we all say goodbye? All right. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.